With everyone getting access to Fischl alongside a new free skin in the 2.8 event, it's fair to say there's been a resurgence in Fischl's popularity. She's always been a strong unit in the metagame, but as we've seen more new Electro units, players have been quick to flock to them for a chance at changing up their playstyle. But as more and more players return to Fischl, there are those who want to know where she fits best. So in this video, I'll be going over 4 great team options for Fischl and how to play them. If you're curious about Fischl builds or anything, I'll link my Fischl guide in the description. It answers all sorts of questions, and it's basically up to date, not much has really changed. Lastly, if you enjoy these types of videos, make sure to leave a like because it lets YouTube know the video doesn't suck. And with all that being said, my name is Braxophone, and here are 4 of the best teams for Fischl. One area where Fischl is great is in overload setups. While there aren't many overload focused teams that are technically in the meta, there are teams that combine Vaporize with overload to deal tons of extra damage. For example, this team with Diluc, Xingqiu, Fischl, and Bennett lets Diluc deal high damage with his Vaporize, Xingqiu deal lots of damage by himself, and because Fischl's skill snapshots buffs after a second, Bennett can be buffing both Fischl and Diluc at the same time. Now the reason it works is actually pretty simple. When you apply Hydro to an enemy, Electro can be present at the same time. What that means is that when Diluc brings Pyro in contact with something that has Electro and Hydro on it, he'll trigger both a Vaporize to multiply his damage and an Overload at the same time, which gives extra reaction damage in an area. And this applies to all Pyro characters that you would play in a Vape team. You can usually throw in an Electro character and cause overloads at the same time. Also, it's important to remember that if you place Oz down while standing in Bennett's burst, you can snapshot that attack buff onto Oz so that even when Fischl isn't on the field, Oz is still dealing more damage from Bennett's burst. Now, one negative thing about this setup is that Overload knocks enemies away, and for melee characters like Diluc, that can be an issue. You could go with Xiangling and follow enemies around, but another solution is to use Yoimiya instead, since her arrows can track enemies and hit at range, so Overload is less of an issue for her. She's really easy to play in a team like this, though if you want to be safer, you could run someone like Zhongli instead as a shield, since for Yoimiya, you want to make sure to get all of your attacks in. And for that, I'll explain why in a later Yoimiya video. You can also opt for Hu Tao instead of Yoimiya with this comp, but again, because Hu Tao is melee, it can be a toss-up on whether or not you're knocking enemies out of your range. Generally, it should be fine because she has high mobility, and against enemies that are big, you don't really have to worry about that as much, but it's at least worth bringing up. Overvape is a great team option for Fischl, and I'd highly recommend trying it out if you love pyro damage dealers. If you happen to be using physical Fischl, this is a team you'll want to look into. There's a few variants of this, but the team I opt to go for is Fischl, Rosaria, Diona, and Yunjin. You don't necessarily need Rosaria C6, but if you do happen to have it, it's super great because it lowers enemy physical resistance when they're in her burst. I like Diona for shields and heals, and adding Rosaria for damage and Cryo Resonance for a bit more crit rate. By using a Cryo with Fischl, you're able to cause Superconduct, which is basically just a reaction that does a little bit of damage and lowers enemy physical resistance. When you combine that with Yunjin, you're able to deal really solid physical damage on Fischl. And Yunjin is a key player here. What she's going to do is buff Fischl's attacks based on her defense and talent level. Something that not everybody knows though is that Yunjin gets extra value with Fischl at Constellation 1, because Oz will deal bonus physical damage when he's off the field, and Yunjin actually buffs those hits too. So essentially Yunjin's getting double value. When you combine Fischl and Yunjin, you can output seriously good physical damage. Now when you're playing physical Fischl at Constellation 1, you actually don't want Oz on the field. If you use Oz, you'll miss out on a lot of damage from Yunjin's buff because you won't be able to get the secondary attacks. There are exceptions to this in rare occasions, like with certain buffs in combination with Fischl's signature bow, Mitternacht Waltz, but for the most part, you want to avoid using him. But where will you get Electro from without Oz? Well, you're going to Charge Shot. The reason I advocate for using Charge Shot is because it makes rotations a lot faster, and since Fischl is high single target damage, most of your focus should be on single target content. For example, the boss half of Spiral Abyss. However, if that's not really your thing, you have 2 other options. You can just use Oz and wait about 6 or 7 seconds to start rotating through your characters to maximize your damage, just so that way he disappears by the time you've activated Yunjin and started attacking with Fischl. Or you can also just opt to replace Rosaria or Diona with another Electro like Raiden or Yaimiko. By doing that, you effectively don't need to summon Oz at all, and you can still Superconduct. But in general, I would avoid Beidou since you're not going to be using Oz on the field in this case, and Oz is what you need to actually battery Beto. So because Oz isn't really on the field, Beto's going to have trouble getting a burst up. Overall, Physical Fischl is surprisingly strong, and this is one of her best setups for that playstyle. Returning now to support and sub DPS Fischl, we're looking at another Superconduct team. In this team, Fischl fills a lot of roles, including off-field damage dealer, superconductor, and battery for most of the other characters on the team. With a team of Eula, Fischl, Rosaria, and Zhongli, you're able to lower enemy physical resistance and smack them around with a giant sword. This team works for a number of reasons, and one of them is Fischl and Rosaria's super high damage contribution. Both Fischl and Rosaria individually deal a ton of damage, and on top of that, Zhongli's shield also lowers enemy resistances all around, so he not only makes it easier and safer for Eula to spam attacks, but he also is increasing everyone's total damage dealt indirectly. Having a shield in this team is good in general because you want to make sure you get as many hits in as possible when you have Eula's burst up, and you can be interrupted if you don't have a shield, so it's a good idea to have that just in case. Now with this team, you want to make sure to use Rosaria's skill before you summon Oz, since you can actually snapshot Rosaria's crit rate buff and retain it for the entirety of Oz being on the field. If you don't have Eula, you could always opt for a different physical carry though. You could use Zhongli as a physical DPS or Razor even. And if you don't have Zhongli for a shield, you could use Diona instead, since she's able to shield and heal at the same time, and she's cryo. There's a lot of flexibility for physical comps, and Fischl is able to bring benefits like battery, tenacity of the millilith buff, superconduct, and generally high damage to the table. Most superconduct teams that I know use Fischl, and she's very strong in all of them. If you're playing a physical carry, Fischl makes a great unit for these types of teams. The last team you'll definitely want to check out is the Taser setup, which is a team completely focused on elemental reactions. The team consists of Sucrose, Fischl, Xingqiu, and Beto typically, but there's lots of flexible positions. Xingqiu could be replaced with Yelan, Kokomi, Ayato, and even Child if you wanted to change up how the team works. Fischl or Beto could be swapped out for Yaimiko, but obviously if you're here you want to play Fischl, and Sucrose in some cases could be swapped out for other characters, but namely the big one is going to be Hazo. Hazo is actually very strong in Taser. But with this team in general, you debuff enemies with Sucrose and Viridescent Venerer, you deal high electro damage with Fischl and Beto, and you deal high hydro damage and give stagger resistance and healing with Xingqiu if you choose to use them. The reason this team works so well is because Swirl will apply elements to enemies in an area, meaning if you hit an enemy that has hydro on them with Swirl, the Swirl will apply hydro to the enemies around them. And so when you have a ton of electro application and hydro application, you're able to constantly proc electro charged over and over and over in combination with Swirl and debuffing all of the other enemies' resistances so you deal more damage to them, and it all just stacks up to make a super strong team. It also stun locks enemies a lot of the time, so that's kind of nice. And in general, Taser's sort of been at the top of the meta for a while. With it, you're able to clear the hardest content with ease. Just the one thing worth noting about it is that it's not as good in single target as it is in multi-target, at least not the standard variation of Taser. Now, though those are 4 amazing team setups for Fischl, there are plenty of other teams that Fischl works with. These two are a couple honorable mentions. First, Sukokomon is a team that features Sucrose, Kokomi, Fischl, and Xiangling. It can get extremely high damage when played perfectly, but loses a lot of value when it's not. If you're a very serious player and love memorizing long rotations, Sukokomon is a great team for that. It's very hard to play at the highest level, but since it is hard to maximize damage for the average player and heavily depends on whether or not enemies already have auras on them, I decided to go with the standard Overvape instead. Now the second honorable mention goes to Fischl, which is a Raiden hyper carry team. Raiden hyper carry usually uses Raiden, Bennett, Kazuha, and Sarah, but Fischl uses Fischl instead of Sarah. If a player doesn't have constellations on Raiden or Sarah, Fischl can actually outperform Sarah and her buff in a hyper carry team for Raiden. Fischl puts out tons of electro damage by using Bennett and Kazuha to buff Fischl before she summons Oz, and also mega buff Raiden in her burst. I could go on for days about Fischl teams, but I hope that you find at least one of these teams interesting enough to build and play your Fischl. She's always been strong, and now with the new outfit in 2.8, there's only more reason to love playing her. And with Dendro on the way, I'm sure she'll get even better. If you guys have enjoyed, let me know in the comments below and by liking the video. If you want to be involved with the community, consider following my socials or checking out my Twitch at twitch.tv/Braxophone. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll catch you next time.